All right, hello everybody. We will give it just another couple of seconds before we get started to let anybody else join. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. I am Daniel McElroy. I am an academic mentor with ESM Prep based in London. And I am here today with Stuart Easton. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure do. I am also an academic mentor with ESM. I'm based in San Diego, and we are here today to talk some SSAT ISEE, which is super exciting.
That's right. So we are going to kind of keep this as a bit of a question and answer format today, answering some frequently asked questions we get from parents about everything related to both of these tests, how to choose one, what are the differences between them, what are some of the things that your child might do to prepare for them, things like that. So I'll get started and just sort of ask you, Stuart, the first question, which I think is what are these tests and what do they look like?
Yeah, and that's definitely the most common question, and it's the best place to start. And so the SSAT is broken into reading, vocab, and two quantitative sections, meaning two math sections, basically. And the reading is going to be 40 minutes for 40 questions. The vocab is going to be 30 minutes for 60 questions. And the math is going to be two 30-minute sections for 25 questions each. So you're looking, there is a strange thing with the SSAT where they include an experimental section that doesn't affect your score. But essentially your student, if they sign up for that test, would be taking 167 questions in about 3 hours. The ISEE isn't quite as uniform. It's a little bit different, but it has the same basic sections. So the reading section is 36 questions in 35 minutes. The vocab is 40 questions in 20 minutes. And the math is going to be two sections, one called quantitative, one called mathematics achievement. And that's a total of 84 questions in 75 minutes. For a total overall of 160 questions in about 3 hours as well. So the basic structure of the test is similar. Some of the differences would be in those math sections. And also in the vocab, you would see 30 synonyms and 30 analogies on the SSAT, but you would see 20 synonyms and 20 sentence completions for the ISEE. So that's kind of the basic structure, and that structure can kind of lead us maybe to the next question or down the path of who should take what test or what test aligns where.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, in terms of the reading, you're going to get slightly different styles of passages on the reading sections between the two different tests. So the SSAT is going to have a little bit of poetry and also some older passages, sort of written longer ago, whereas the ISEE is going to have a lot more modern passages. So, depending on your students' sort of prior reading strength, that might be something that you want to keep in mind. And then same thing with the vocab. There is this difference between the SSAT using analogies to test vocabulary, whereas the ISEE uses sentence completion. So again, sort of just a question of really what your student is able to manage best. And then, of course, with the math, the SSAT has fewer questions, but it's a little bit more algebraic. And then the ISEE is going to be much more complex. So it's also sort of more questions spread across two separate sections. And yeah, so really, I think at the end of the day, though, and I think Stuart, maybe you can talk a bit more about this, depending on where you're applying, you may not actually really be making much of a choice, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of parents come to us, a lot of families come to us, and their question is, which test should I take? And the number one place to start is with the school you're hoping to get into. And if there's not one target school, the range of schools or the few schools, because the worst situation to be in is to ace a test that the school isn't interested in. So the number one place when you're deciding which of these should I take would be what offers me the most utility for the schools I'm applying to. If you do have the option, and there are many schools that accept both, then we start to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of each of the tests. And there's some basic holistic differences that can be easy decision makers. The most being that the SSAT is certainly geared more towards a student strong in vocabulary and reading, whereas the ISEE offers a better chance for a student with a strong math background. If there's a student with kind of equal footing in each, I think I personally have a preference of the ISEE because I find vocab to be the section that is the hardest to improve, especially depending on timeline. And so given that, I think most often we can build math skills, but we can't always build vocabulary. But as Daniel said, there are a lot of times where this isn't actually even a decision. And so knowing the two tests is important, but knowing which test you need is even more important.
Yeah, and so then one other thing I would add is that sort of about the sort of high level format of these exams is that they do both include a short essay and get a lot of questions about whether or not you should be worried about that essay, what kind of preparation you should do for the essay. And at the end of the day, it actually isn't all that important because the essay doesn't actually affect your score on the test. And so, schools may see the essay, they may sort of like look at it to understand where a student is at with their writing skills coming in and things like this. But in terms of the actual score that you're submitting, the essay is not factoring into that. So it's really not something to be so worried about.
Absolutely. And just one note on that is, as Daniel said, it is seeable by the school. So you want to make sure that you complete it and you put your best foot forward. But in terms of prep, it isn't worth the time preparing for it.
Right, absolutely. So Stuart, could you talk a little bit about how are these tests scored? And also what is a good score on these tests?
Yeah, of course. And, we try our best not to be results based. It's about the process and building skills and everything, but the score is the important part. And so focusing on the ISEE first, the 4 sections are each graded or each scored on a scale of 1 to 9. Now, the key here is for both of these scores is that percentiles do come into play. Now, we can't tell you what percentiles will be. We can make predictions based on past scores and things like that, but at the end of the day, each test is unique. What I will say is that the score, the kind of cutoff of numbers for the ISEE is usually 7. If you're in 7, you're starting to get safe, and then 8s and 9s are definitely safe. Does this mean that you need to hit that in every section? Not necessarily. Again, it does depend on the school. And I can't emphasize enough that there is a real benefit to, especially if you have one school in mind, reaching out, forming a relationship, learning about what they value, what they don't, or I'm sure they value everything, but what they value more. And with that being said, if you were to hit 8s and 9s and everything, there's very little chance you're going to have to do much worrying. If you're 7, 8s, and 9s, you're probably still in a fairly safe area. If you get 3 9s and 1 drops below that, you could still be safe. But once you start dipping below 7s, you're definitely putting yourself at the mercy of the application pool, of the percentiles of that test. So, for a student looking to not have any worries about admissions, 8s and 9s with maybe a sprinkle of a 7 in there would be fairly typical. For the SSAT, again, percentiles play a huge part. Not something we can fully address here, but given the 3 sections are scored like the SAT out of 800, 3 700s puts you in a fairly safe zone. That'll typically put you around the 80th percentile, which a lot of schools, the more competitive schools, look for. Again, that 3 700s puts you in an overall score of 2100. You can get a 2100 with 2 800s and a 500, and that probably doesn't look as appealing. So they really do value the equality over all sections, but that again is where you reach out to the school, you get a good sense of, hey, we're really interested in students who show up with a strong math background. We know vocabulary is tough, so we're a little more lenient in that area. And Daniel's mentioned it, I've mentioned it now a couple of times. Reaching out to the school is definitely always a good idea. If for no other reason, to put yourself on their radar and form a relationship with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then another sort of set of questions that we get are, when do students take these tests, and how many times should a student take the test? How many times can a student take the test?
Yeah, and this again is a decision point. Now, if we've gone through everything to this point and we still are 50-50, it's noteworthy that the ISEE can be taken 3 times. They have cycles. The first cycle being the fall from August to November, second cycle being spring, December to March, third cycle being summer, April to July. Typically, we try and get a student taking the ISEE to take if not the summer, then the fall. It's the most popular cycle. But having that 3 attempt for some students makes that a little more high pressure. Whereas the SSAT, especially now that they've got a lot of online options, it can essentially be taken, not limitless, but it can be taken 8 times. You can take it 5 times online, and you can do some in person, and there's kind of combinations of the environments you take it in, but it's administered every Saturday and 1 Sunday per month. So if, knowing your student, as we get to know your student, if there's someone who is looking for that safety net of, oh man, this one didn't go so well, I had a bad day on this one, I still have those extra attempts, the SSAT might be the right path. The ISEE, those 3 cycles is usually plenty for most students. It's not usually a decision point, but in extreme cases, it does provide that extra comfort of, okay, I can have a bad day, things can not go my way, and I'm still okay.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So I think, one other question that I've heard come up a few times is anxiety, really, just anxiety around the process. And, is a student going to be overwhelmed by testing? And if not just the test, also the entire sort of school admissions process. What do you say to people who have those concerns?
Yeah, and this is, in a weird way, my favorite conversation to have, because I think this really, and standardized tests have their drawbacks and their downfalls, and we can have a separate webinar about all of those. But at the end of the day, they are a part of the academic life of many students. And we get this awesome opportunity on the SSAT, ISEE to be that almost first contact point with a student and the testing process. Now, whether or not that student has taken, some form of standardized test, it most likely isn't an admissions test like these tests, or when you get down the line, the SAT, the ACT, down the line further, GRE, LSATs, all these different tests. So I think the test anxiety is certainly natural for this test because it's, again, first contact point. But that gives us this really great opportunity to step in and make that first experience positive. And so there's kind of 2 camps of students here. Ones who have maybe anxiety from a self-confidence standpoint. And that's where we as mentors really get the opportunity to show them how they can translate hard work into confidence. And the second is anxiety from a lack of experience with the test. And, again, it's this really cool place where we get to interact with students where we're laying the foundation. And I've had many students who maybe haven't have had higher hopes for their score, but have actually gotten more out of the process because when they take their next test, the SAT or the ACT down the line, it's, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's simple for them. They've done this before. So I almost embrace that anxiety. I almost recommend parents or families with students who are anxious to even more consider taking these tests going into prep, because it's a chance to nip it in the bud a little bit. It's a chance to harness that energy and put it in a more positive direction by showing a student that these tests are solvable, they are knowable, and with some hard work and with some studying, you can get the score you want, and that sets you on a trajectory to believe in yourself for your further academic career.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like, these tests standardized testing will continue to be a part of students' lives, and it will only get more stressful and higher stakes. And so there's absolutely something to be said for the fact that, there are skills that everyone has to develop sort of through their academic careers, about how to answer multiple choice questions under timed pressured situations. And why not learn how to do that when you're a little bit younger, when the stakes feel a little bit less high?
Mhm.
As you say, it's going to make someday when you're taking an SAT or ACT a whole lot less stressful. And so there's a lot of the work that we can do with students is really focused on helping them um, understand what to do with that time in a timed section, how to manage a reading passage or something in a way that is going to feel a lot more comfortable. Um, which is that's such a big part of standardized testing. Standardized testing isn't just somehow figuring out answers. It's figuring out how to manage a passage, how to budget your time, and all of these things. And it's all learnable and it's all doable for pretty much every student. So yeah, absolutely. I think like the anxiety is to be expected, but it's also a great opportunity, as you say, for sure.
And I also, just to the point you were just making, it is really cool to see students learn about the different brains that they can hold. They
Mm,
have their school brain where in math class you show your full workout, otherwise you lose points, but then they get this test taking brain and they're like, hold on a second, this is a whole different set of skills. This is, how to manage my time. How
mm,
can I reverse engineer this? How can I use, that thing I did in session where I crossed out answers and I eliminated, and it gives them this bag of tools, and it also teaches them the different forms academia can take, and it's a cool experience.
yeah, totally. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about test prep itself. I think this is a good segue into what preparing for these tests can actually look like.
Yeah, and I think the number one word I want to make sure I lead with here is personalized, because when we are looking at prep, we're talking about one-on-one prep. The beauty is that this standardized test is met with personalized prep. And each of these tests is going to be uniform in what it offers, but the way a student receives that is going to be individual. And we want to make sure that when we are doing our prep, it's heavily focused on filling the gaps, boosting the areas, and making a long-term plan. Now, part of the personalization is what the timeline is. Some students, we'll meet with for just 4 or 5 sessions, and some students we work with for months. The bottom line, though, is through the tools we have on the diagnostics, on the resources that are offered through the different portals, we have the ability to see, okay, we're really, really strong on those synonyms. But when it comes to analogies, something's not quite clicking. We dig in deeper and we see, oh, it's not all analogies. It's actually just the relationships that talk about degree. And then we have the resources of quizzes and things of that nature. So I think the personalization of the prep is important. I also think there's this element too of pacing. Uh, there's a lot of students who, again, first time think that more studying is better. And to a point, yes. But then, I think we've both probably seen it where we get a student coming to us who's spent months just in the books. And by the time they get to us, their brain is kind of overworked and there's not much to do there. So I think what we can offer is the personalization, or what prep offers is the personalization, but also the ability to know you're doing enough without doing too much.
That is such a great point. Such a great point. It's about using the time you have to prepare in a way that is actually getting you somewhere from point A to point B,
Exactly.
rather than just sort of like working yourself to the point of exhaustion and having not actually found a new perspective on how to approach something. Or yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like getting a little bit deeper into sort of like what the timeline for prep looks like. We're going into the summer now,
Mhm.
um, and the summer is a great time to start really working on these tests, because obviously students have a little bit more time in their schedules, a little bit, more mental space. And one of the things that we really, really recommend is starting with vocabulary prep as soon as you possibly can. So like now, next week at least, but really like through the next month. Vocabulary prep is so important, because it's not something that, what Stuart makes a great point, we can really help dig into specific kinds of analogies or something like that. But the actual meaning of words, we can't sort of download that information into your brain as much as we wish we could. And students just need to spend time with flashcards or games, all kinds of different ways of looking at vocabulary. And we actually have a lot of resources that we can point you in the direction of if you're interested. But students need to spend that time with vocabulary in order to really, Stuart mentioned it can take some time to actually move the needle when it comes to vocabulary. And time and effort is really what makes the difference there. So we really, really recommend getting started with vocab as soon as you possibly can, so that also by the time you are working with a mentor, you are in a position where they can actually be helping you with how to approach a vocabulary question, rather than trying to needing to explain to you, the meaning of 2 or 3 of the words in the question. Um, and yeah, so then, what would be the next step after getting started with vocab?
Yeah, and so I think the key with vocab is start early, and then also mixing in things like roots, prefixes, suffixes, like making it a complex study. But as you have that ball rolling, you want to also around the June, and this is a prep timeline ideal. Like if you're watching this on a recording, you don't have to follow this exactly, but this is the order of operations. You definitely want to establish some contact with the school, just to, if nothing else, let them know you're there. Start to learn a little bit about them and their hopes and what they're looking for. And the vocab is universal. The SSAT is slightly harder, different vocab, but you don't have to know what test you're taking to start your vocab. But then probably the next step after that would be to start prep in some way, whether you're going with tutoring, whether you're signing up for the portals through the tests, whether you're doing some individual stuff. July-ish would be where we would want to get that ball rolling, and that links heavily to math. I think that's an important time to start math, because we don't know what we don't know until we start that prep. And if there is a gap, a hole, something that didn't quite click the last year or the year before, or that we just never learned in our classes, then that gives us that multiple month runway to fill those gaps, whether it's, again, with a tutor, with a book, with an online course. It's really important that we know that as soon as possible. And so once you've started that, Daniel, what happens next?
Yeah, so going into sort of late summer, you know, you would begin taking practice tests. Of course, we would also sort of work with you through the reading section as well. So addressing all areas of the test. But around August, you would want to take at least that first practice test to see what kind of progress you've made, where you're at, and then sort of from there decide when you're going to take your first test. And in an ideal situation, you would want to take that first test in the fall, so September or October, which is a nice time to take the test because it gives you plenty of time to retest if that ends up being necessary. So that's kind of why this entire prep timeline is built around sort of prepping through the summer and into the autumn. Just to really position you so that you have time to take a test, have time to take a second test if you should need it, and then get into the rest of the application process from there.
Absolutely. And just one note on that too, that September, October test time is really nice because it also hits before the school year gets too busy, before work comes in. So this summer timeline really is nice because it doesn't overload a student who obviously is working in other areas to make their application look good. And if you can get testing over by the fall, winter, that also allows you then to turn attention to things like admissions essays, any other extracurriculars that might need to happen the rest of the application.
Absolutely. So we have a couple questions. One of them being, what can I prep for these tests on my own, and what is the value of actually working one-on-one with a mentor?
Absolutely, and totally valid question. Of course, the answer is you can prep on your own, and every student is different, every family is different, every situation is different. Of course, I think we will advocate for the value of a tutor and a mentor in the sense that if you are going down this road for the first time, it is important that there will be some traps, some pitfalls, some moments. An example would be what we call the initial bump and the initial plateau, which is, a student who gets their hands on new material will have that bump. They'll go up and they'll be feeling good. But then many times there will be a plateau because that next level of points to squeeze out is going to be more difficult. So I think that navigating that, we've had a lot of families come to us in that plateau, and they've really, we've been able to help them and we've worked through it. But I think the message is that when you have someone guiding you, the process is more efficient and effective. And in those moments of difficulty, you're not alone. And it's important that, this is going to be a quote unquote high stakes situation. This is going to be something where the result matters to you. And I think at the end of the day, it's important that there's someone along for the ride with you to let you know what's an issue and what's typical and what you should be expecting. And that kind of leads me to another major point is there's this aspect of this, especially for first-time families going through this process of managing expectations, not in a way where we want to lower them, but in a way where we want to help you understand what's coming and what it'll take to get to different places. So to wrap all that up in maybe a nice cohesive sentence, I think the value of a mentor is that you have a guide, you're not alone, and there's someone to lean on in hard times and someone to help you get to those better times, those higher increases, more efficient work.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, yeah, and then one other, if I was to take one thing out of today, what would that one most important thing be?
Yeah, and it's not flashy, it's not fancy, but it would just be start vocab. Daniel and I cannot tell you how many times we have met with a student and that the high achieving students, but that's the piece, like you said, you just can't download, you can't have it overnight. You can grind out a lot of math content in a week. But if you start vocab now, it's really a compounding exponential effect where okay, if I learn 25 words a week, but I do it for, 10, 12 weeks, it's quite a number of words. If I do 50 a week, if I learn roots and prefixes and suffixes, all of a sudden I could be a thousand words learned over this summer. And then I go into prep, or I'm into prep, but I have that bank to rely on. Whereas I think we all have the experience of, trying to cram something into the last minute and then realizing this isn't crammable. So yeah, the
I was
single thing is start vocab.
so I was just gonna add, like, it's the cramming is the other issue where, right, where you may be starting prep even in August or September if you've come to it a bit late. If you're watching this a bit late, it's possible that you're starting a bit later, and if you haven't found the time for that vocab before the school year gets going again, before activities pick up and things like that, it's one extra stress that's on your mind while you're trying to manage the rest of life and the rest of ISEE or SSAT
Yeah,
prep. So getting it done and out of the way, and even making it part of your routine, making it something that you just spend 15 or 20 minutes on a day, um, as you say, can really just add up over time and position you in such a better place for taking these tests.
absolutely. And just like you said, you get it in your routine, you get it in your schedule. You're also get this ingrained process of figuring out words. You'll start, in your third or fourth week of prep or vocab, you'll look and you'll say, oh, I kind of recognize this part, kind of recognize that part. Maybe I know what this word means without even learning it. And that's that's where the added value of that early start comes in as well.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that just about covers it. Is there anything that you can think of that is left to say?
The only thing would be just that if you are a parent or a student or a family watching this, that this process can be intimidating. It can be scary, and we tried to touch on some of those points too. But I would just highly stress that if this is a first time experience for you, you are totally within your rights, and you're totally natural to feel that anxiety and that pressure. And that's where we come in, and my email's always open, Daniel's email's always open. So please, even if it's just for someone to tell you it's all going to be okay, it's we're available.
Absolutely. Cannot echo that enough. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. Hope you learned some useful information about the ISEE and SSAT. And good luck with your whole application process.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.